This video is part 3 of my coverage of Chapter 14, Zen and the Buddhist Tradition for PSY 230, Personality Theory. In this section, we're going to start with a video that will get us into the mindset of thinking about how does Zen Buddhism how do people who practice Zen Buddhism think about the process of growing and becoming more fully what we can become. And I'm going to start with a video clip that I really enjoy because it shows in a pictorial, in this case in an animation way, the way in which this process can be conceptualized, kind of in the context of storytelling. So I added that animation because in your chapter you're given still images of the story of the ox, and I think it helps to see the story kind of laid out in that visual way, more in a kind of storyboarded sequence. So the way it's described for you in your text, you have the person who is seeking, the person who wants to get on the path to enlightenment. So they're seeking the middle way. And in the animation, the person notices the footprints of the ox. That's the signal that this is a person who wants to become a person on a spiritual path, on a quest, if you will. Then you find the tracks, you start the intellectual process of trying to understand the Buddhist way. And you know, think about that word intellectual. So you pick up a book or you work in a class to study, to try and get your mind around the ideas. You're still not experiencing it with depth and with directness. So you're following these concrete, obvious, objective path or tracks in the sand. Then there's a first glimpse. There's the moment when the person who is seeking has a fleeting experience of what your authors call the Buddha nature. You know, in Maslow's language, it could be a fleeting peak experience of awareness. And of course, you know, the impetus, you want to grab a hold of it. So the next step is catching the ox, where you want to, you know, if you follow the metaphor, you want to harness that thing. You want to rope it, hold on to it, 'cause it's going to run away. And you don't want it to run away. So you try and force it to stay with you. And that's, you know, goes against the principles of Buddhism. To capture that experience and hold it and covet it is incorrect. So what is required is more self-discipline, more mindful awareness. So in the animation, when the seeker sits on the stone and plays the flute, beauty surrounds that experience. So it's kind of metaphoric for the practice of mindfulness and the practice of meditation that opens the person to the beauty that is all around. So if you go back to Thich Nhat Hanh, is you are in the right here and the right now, in the present moment, aware of the beauty that surrounds you. And then you see the transformation of the ox. The ox becomes light, and is willing and comes to the person. It doesn't need to be captured. It comes to the person. So the person is able to, through their own practice, through their own self-discipline, to become more and more aware of the Buddha nature, and it becomes built into all activities. So the ox returns, it returns of its own. There's the struggle ebbs away, and in this case, the seeker is able to, with ease, access and experience that true self. The next step, the next stage, is accompanying that, you know, that metaphor of the ox riding it home. So the student, the seeker, has acquired some wisdom, has acquired some understanding, some knowledge, and they have a deep awareness. They then become more spontaneous. They become more nuanced, but at the same time, their experiences are very direct, very simple. And since they are returning home, and if you think about that the Theravada and the Mahayana, the difference between those, when in some cases the Bodhisattva is the teacher. So now the seekers return home, the whole pursuit of the ox is forgotten, because the realization is there was no thing that had to be gotten. it was all within the person already. So everyday life is now something that doesn't have to be trained for, doesn't have to be pursued. Everyday life is enlightenment. Everyday life is the experience of the truth. Now, that's not all, obviously. When both the ego, the self, small s, self, when both the ox, which is the metaphor for enlightenment, when both the ego and the ox are forgotten, then this essential state of Buddha nature can be transcended. And that's where you're getting to the true experience of enlightenment. And that's where, with the metaphor, if you're following the metaphor, you're returning to the source. So in the animation, you have the person, you have the metaphor of going out on the boat with the body wrapped into the water. That return to the source comes in that sort of metaphoric delivery of the body. So you have the way people live becomes a mirror of that source, that truth, that dynamic appreciation. And then the final element, and you see this in the animation as well, you have the bodhisattva who is capable of who is capable of teaching others and bringing gifts to others, supporting them in their process of growth. It is shown in the animation with the rather Buddha-looking character who gives the gift to the last person that you see in the animation. Now, what are the things that interfere with growth? For Buddhists, greed is a primary obstacle to growth, because when we are filled with greed, we want more and more and more, and we never feel satisfied with what we have. So when we want more than what we actually need, we become dominated by the motive of greed, and which can easily turn into vanity and unhappiness and the desire to manipulate and control others. The Buddhists also talked about it in terms of it being obvious when people overindulge. So when they overindulge, when they buy too many things, when they overindulge with food, when they overindulge with sex, when they are kind of covering themselves in signs of their wealth, is also a manifestation of greed. Hatred is also seen as an obstacle to growth. When people are consumed by hate, they are quick to be angry, they hold grudges, they make other people small, they talk down about them, they tend to be very arrogant, but also very sensitive to slights. So these are people that you walk on eggshells around. They see their lives as a battle to be fought, and tend to be quite vengeful as they're going about it. As with greed, when we are in a hateful mindset, it is impossible to suppress the needs of the ego that constantly need to be pampered and taken care of. So when you're in a hateful state, it is all about the ego. The same with greed. When you are filled with the desire to have more and more and more, you are in a totally egoic state. Delusion is another obstacle to growth. Delusion is described as being not just ignorant, but also confused about what you are. Delusion, as your authors put it, these are people who are indecisive. They may kind of absorb the opinions and values of others without taking the time to explore their own experiences and explore the world and the both interior and exterior in order to understand what's going on more. There's a description of such individuals as being as lacking industry, being lazy and oppositional. So these may be people where you offer them a solution to a problem that they've just been complaining about, and they reject your solution as unworkable. But they may be worried all the time and telling others that they're worried all the time, but they don't take steps that are necessary to come out of that. So that's described as the state of delusion. And then there's pride. In Buddhist tradition, being prideful is something that imbues the ego with far too much, much of what it doesn't deserve. So when you are disrespectful of those who know and have been on the path for longer than you, that disrespect or lack of respect for teachers, and also pride is shown in rejecting or questioning or distorting the teachings that you are attempting to learn. And also a kind of a premature belief that you know all and you no longer need practice or you no longer need instruction will interfere with your ability to continue to grow. Now, Buddhist tradition tends to push for this idea of the middle way. And what's desired is, if you're talking about the body and an experience of the body, you're neither giving in fully to all of the desires that the body has, nor are you completely denying the body's needs. So there's not an expectation that you completely starve yourself, that you have no nice things, that you have no comforts, such as a soft bed or warm clothing when it's cold. But it is assumed that you don't need more than you actually need. The body is seen as something to be used for the time, for the right here and the right now, to pursue truth. And it is your responsibility to care for that body such that you can continue that pursuit. In social relationships, Buddhist teachings emphasize that we are responsible to each other. So it's seen as very important that we engage in social interactions for the purpose of growth, not to abuse others, not to create our own worth, not to use them to piggyback and create our own successes, but instead to be connected to others for the purpose of mutual growth. So social interactions are all seen as an opportunity to grow. And it's interesting to me that Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow both emphasized in different ways this idea that every interaction you have with another human being, every interaction you have with your world is an opportunity for greater and deeper understanding and therefore for growth. In terms of the will, will is an opportunity to become more aware. So your authors say will develops through the exercise of the will. You make choices and you take steps. And by doing that, by engaging in your training, you will learn and you will grow, but you have to choose it. So enlightenment doesn't just get bestowed upon you. It requires an exercise of will for it to occur for anyone. In terms of emotions, a big part of the practice of Buddhism is about your relationship with your emotional life. Particularly in Western psychology, we tend to think of emotions as things that afflict us, especially the negative emotions. They're things that You become angry because outside things make you angry, and then you have no control over them. Even when we talk about being in love, we talk about it like it's an infectious disease. So in Buddhism, there's a very different way of thinking about emotion. And the practice of Buddhism, it involves intentional relationship with your emotional life. When we become more aware, when we become more mindful, we are less a slave to our emotions. We learn that we can actually, instead of becoming angry, instead of experiencing anger in situations where we perceive that someone has treated us badly, or when we, instead of feeling frustration when a goal has been interfered with, we have choices about what we're going to feel, and we can control those, especially negative emotions, but also the intensely positive ones, lest they become egoic in their nature. From the Buddhist tradition, the ideal emotional state is compassion, is loving awareness of your unity with all other things. The emotions that get in the way of our ability to grow and develop are things like anger and fear, which can be compulsive in their nature and very destructive, especially because we tend to project. When we feel angry, we tend to project it onto others. When we feel fearful, we project it out and identify the source of that fear and anxiety as being outside of us. So the goal is to say, within you have the capacity to change and reframe those emotional experiences. Your awareness allows you to let go of the power that those emotions appear to have, and recognize that they have no power over you at all. The intellect portion, there's an assumption in Buddhism that being purely intellectual, being purely a thinking being, isn't going to allow you to fully understand yourself or the world that you're in. Because in the Buddhist tradition, intellect is not enough. We are social creatures. We are emotional creatures. Now, I just spent the last couple of minutes talking about controlling emotion and experiencing deep states of compassion. Intellect is not sufficient. We also have to have this deeply experienced emotional state of compassion and empathy for ourselves and for others. Then finally, self. There's the ego, that would be the lesser self, is often how we spend our waking moments, is living within our ego state of what we're missing, what we don't have, what we can't have, what we're experiencing as frustration and struggle and pain and dissatisfaction. As we become, as we're on this middle way path, the assumption is that the lesser ego loses power and is basically set aside in favor of this more compassionate, deeply emotionally experienced transcendent self with a capital S. It's not that ego is destroyed, because you're still going to be in the right here and the right now in the body that you currently occupy. It's just that you're not controlled by it any longer. So the ego may be there, kind of chipping away, but as your awareness becomes stronger, as your capacity to reframe and control emotions that can become overwhelming, especially negative emotions that can become overwhelming and push you in the direction of misguided misunderstandings of your situation, the ego, you're redefining its importance and its relevance. Instead of it being all there is about your experience, it just becomes one relatively minor aspect of it. Finally, there are some applications of Buddhism that are pretty obvious. Frequently, we have, we see Buddhist meditation techniques that are incorporated into Western medicine and psychology. There's also mindfulness-based stress reduction that's based on Buddhist meditation techniques, similar to Zazen techniques. And there's mindfulness-based cognitive therapies that have been found to be in research highly, highly impactful and effective. And you can read more about those both in your chapter and in various websites. And that concludes part 3 of my coverage of Chapter 14, Zen in the Buddhist Tradition.